This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what has the wider international organization community done now?
What they have done is the International Criminal Court is seeking an indictment of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the Defense Minister Gallant, and other Israeli officials, charging them with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and every other statute under the ICC sun. And not only that, that's bad enough, and we're going to get into that in a second. But not only are they threatening to indict Prime Minister Netanyahu, the ICC prosecutor is threatening to indict our guest today, Senator Tom Cotton. So Tom Cotton and Mitch McConnell and a group of Republican senators sent a letter to this prosecutor, Karim Khan, when word was coming that he was going to indict Netanyahu, warning him that he has no legal basis to do so, that neither Israel or the United States are members of the ICC and are not under his jurisdiction, and then if he did so, went ahead, we would consider that a threat not only to Israel's sovereignty but our own, and would impose sanctions on him and his organization and the family members of the staff of the ICC. Khan responded by telling him that the threat to his letter was a violation of Article 70 of the Rome Statute, which was a threat even when not acted upon, which prohibits retaliating against an official of the court on account of duties performed by that or another official, and that he must cease and desist, or he would be in violation of the Rome Statute. Tom Cotton, number one, can't be in violation of the Rome Statute because we're not a party to the Rome Statute. He has no jurisdiction over any Americans. But on top of that, the fact that this prosecutor not only thinks it's within his realm of responsibilities to indict Netanyahu, that he thinks he can threaten American members of Congress with indictment by the ICC for carrying out their duties as representatives of the American people duly elected, just shows what an absolute disgrace this court is.
Well, I think you pretty much summarized it. So just to review the bidding for our listeners who don't pay minute attention to the activities of the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor who Mark just referred to, Karim A. Khan, King's Counsel, he's a Brit, is the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court is an organization that was set up in the 1990s. As Mark said, the United States is not a party to it, neither is the State of Israel. Karim Khan said that on the basis of evidence collected and examined by his office, he has reasonable grounds to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense of the State of Israel, bear criminal responsibility for the following war crimes: starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health, willfully killing contrary to Article 8.2, directing attacks against a civilian population, extermination or murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts. Okay, I mean, this is his bill of particulars against the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli Minister of Defense. By the way, Gallant, the Minister of Defense, and Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, are certainly not political allies. Then they also say that in addition to charging Netanyahu, he wants to indict Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Diab Ibrahim al-Masri, that's Mohammed Daif, and Ismail Haniyeh, who, quote, bear criminal responsibility, unquote, for murder, extermination, and taking hostages, among other crimes. So, in the litany of outrages here, the people who perpetrated October 7th, an unprovoked attack resulting in the death of 1,300 people, murder, maiming, kidnapping, abuse of corpses, hostage-taking, beheading. We could go on for a while here. They are being put by Khan on the same level as the democratically elected government of Israel, which is acting to defend itself and to eradicate the perpetrators of October 7th. It's disgusting. It's perverted.
It's not only that, putting aside the moral equivalence, it's bullshit. the, the Israel has done more to protect civilians in urban warfare than any country in human history since the era of modern warfare began. I was just the other day I was listening on X to a phone call between an IDF commander and a Palestinian, in which he was begging, in Rafah, in which he was begging him, giving him a warning and begging him to evacuate because he knew that they had children in the building. And the Palestinian told him, "I'm not going anywhere. We'll just all die because we love death the way you love life." And I mean, who does, if you're committing genocide, I don't recall the recordings of Nazis calling the Jewish ghetto and warning them to get the civilians out of the way because we're coming to exterminate you. That's not what people carrying out genocide tend to do. If you want to carry out genocide, you just kill people. You don't give them warnings. You don't send dumb bombs in to a target first to let people know that there are bombs coming for their targets before you carry out the real bombs. You don't call their houses and ask them to move away. You don't drop leaflets on the city and move them. And you don't withhold operations where you would against legitimate military targets, which Israel does all the time, in order to avoid civilian death. So the idea that he is prosecuting Israel for its conduct when its conduct has been exemplary in the history of warfare, and two, that he draws no moral distinction between Hamas and Israel, just shows what an absolute moron this person is. What a illegitimate.
No, he's not a Mark. Let me correct you. He's not a moron. Okay, Khan is he has been a very serious and well-respected King's Counsel in the UK. He's not a moron. He's an anti-Semite, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. You correct
Everybody
me. I'm
else
sorry. You're
at
right.
the
You're
UN.
right. He's a brilliant anti-Semite. There
But
you
I
go.
mean, that is at the end of the day, that is who is running these international organizations. Guterres, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations and who believed that the October 7th attacks, quote, didn't happen in a vacuum, unquote. The people at UNRWA, who are the terrorists themselves, the High Commissioner for Refugees, who is a virulent anti-Semite. And by the way, one of the most sort of piquant things that happened in this is that this indictment comes down within days of the United Nations revising down by 50%. This is not a polling error, folks. 50%. The number of women and children that they estimate have been killed in Gaza. Because, of course, we've talked about this before. I wrote about it at length in National Review. They are using the numbers coming from Hamas. And all of a sudden they decided, no, actually maybe not that number. Maybe half that number. So even
I don't even
more.
believe it's half.
I don't know whether it's that or not, but anytime you are dealing with a terrorist organization that has put its rocket launchers inside kindergartens, that has put its operations inside hospitals, that keeps hostages inside hospitals, that operates out of people's homes, anytime you do that, civilians are going to get killed. And by the way, it is an explicit war aim of Hamas for civilians to be killed so that they can blame Israel. This is why many Gazans are increasingly upset with them. I want to give you one other factoid at this moment, Mark, because I think it's really important. So you remember that everybody was deeply upset, right? There's famine going on. The head of the Agency for International Development, our own Samantha Power, bemoaned the famine that the Palestinians were being subjected to. This despite the fact that the Israelis have put enough food in Gaza to feed every Gazan more than 3,200 calories a day since the beginning of this war. But never mind. So anyway, we go in, we use U.S. taxpayer dollars to build this pier off of Gaza, right? Okay. We just started delivering in the last couple days off that pier. Every single truck that went in didn't reach its destination. Why, you ask? Wait, I know that you'll be interested in hearing this new and important term of art from the international development community. There is, quote, spontaneous distribution, unquote, going on.
There you
Should
go.
you not
Duty.
do? This is a farce.
That is a great term. We need to keep that in mind when that's what happens when they're shoplifting in New York, right? It's spontaneous distribution of products,
Robbing a
right?
bank. That's spontaneous cash machine work.
There you go. Exactly. So, look, here's the thing. I will quibble a little bit with your characterization that this is just anti-Semitism, because it is anti-Semitism, but it's more than that. It's anti-Americanism and it's supranationalism, right? So they don't just hate the Jews, though they do hate the Jews. They hate America. They believe that we are a rogue power that needs to be constrained and tied down by thousands of Lilliputian threads of international law, which will constrain our actions. And this is how they plan to do it. And so this same prosecutor would have indicted FDR for the bombings of Berlin and Dresden, right? This same prosecutor would just go back through American history and the actions we took in World War II and other places in our own national interests. And who gives this guy and this institution the right to sit in judgment of the national security decisions that the American president makes in conduct of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. war policy? If we have in our country a military justice system, if people violate the laws of war, we can prosecute them. This is a country right now is prosecuting a former president. And Israel, by the way, also, the whole principle of the ICC, this gets into the guts of this horrible, corrupt organization, but it's based on the principle of complementarity, which means that the ICC only promised us back in the 1990s when you and I and Senator Jesse Helms and the Foreign Relations Committee were fighting this thing, its creation, it would only prosecute in the case where a national judicial system was incapable of holding its leaders to account. So it would never target democracies. It would only target totalitarian regimes. Well, I'm sorry. As I understand it, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu has been indicted by the Israeli justice system. So where is the evidence that the Israeli justice system would not hold him accountable if he was carrying out criminal activities? There's no evidence. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary, that he has actually been accused of those things, and the Israeli justice system is carrying out its justice as it sees fit. There is no place for a supranational body to sit in judgment of Israeli foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, and that's why we didn't join the International Criminal Court. It wasn't just Jesse Helms and the conservatives who opposed the ICC. John Kerry and Hillary Clinton both voted for the American Service Members Protection Act. This is a bipartisan policy to oppose the jurisdiction of the ICC over the United States and our allies. And by the way, I'll just add one other thing. Jesse Helms warned this would happen. So I dug up and found an op-ed that Jesse Helms wrote in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, in December of 2000, in which he wrote, quote, "The court will have an independent prosecutor answerable to no state or institution for his or her actions, who could one day issue criminal indictments against Israeli soldiers, military commanders, and government officials all the way up to the prime minister himself." 25 years ago, 24, Jesse Helms warned that this moment would happen. It's finally arrived. He's been vindicated. We need to take action to make sure this court never does this again. And the American Service Members Protection Act was a great start, but it's time for Congress to act. And not just sanctions. I think what we should do, and maybe we can get into this with our guest and in our discussion after, is I think we need to fight fire with fire. If you indict an American citizen or a U.S. ally, or cooperate with that indictment by the ICC, that should be a federal crime, and you should be indicted. In the United States, you should have an international arrest warrant against you, including this prosecutor, Khan. And anytime you set foot in a country that has a extradition treaty with the United States, you should be arrested and brought over here for prosecution for it. That'll put an end to this stuff. If we make it a crime to indict Americans and America and our allies for the conduct of legitimate foreign policy.
Well, let's talk to our guest about that. Tom Cotton, recidivist guest, thank goodness, is a United States Senator from Arkansas. He's on the Judiciary Committee, where he serves as the ranking member for the Subcommittee on Criminal Justice and Counterterrorism. And he's on the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee, where he serves as the ranking member for Air Land Power Subcommittee. Before joining the Senate, Senator Cotton was a member of the House of Representatives. And before that, and I bring this up with him because he knows whereof he speaks, he was an Army Ranger. He joined up in 2005. He finished the Ranger course. He did a parachute course. And then he was deployed to Baghdad as part of the 101st Airborne Division. He knows what combat looks like, and he has some opinions about what the Israelis are doing in Gaza as well.
Here's our interview. Senator Cotton, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Danny, it's good to be back on with you.
Well, we're so glad to have you. You have taken up the mantle of Senator Jesse Helms and are leading the fight in the Senate against this International Criminal Court. And you recently spearheaded a letter to the ICC because of their plan to indict Netanyahu and saying, target Israel and we will target you. The ICC prosecutor tweeted back that when individuals threaten to retaliate against the court, it may constitute an offense against the administration of justice under Article 70 of the Rome Statute, and that you could be prosecuted for doing that. What do you say to the ICC prosecutor?
Well, this is why the International Criminal Court is better called the International Kangaroo Court. One of many reasons, in fact. A prosecutor who can dish it out but can't take it and threatens his critics with prosecution themselves in total disregard for principles of freedom of speech. But since he can't even take that, I'm sure he's not going to appreciate that I also believe that he could be himself open to criminal charges in the United States, certainly not under this administration, but maybe come January. So maybe he's going to get a taste of his own medicine.
That would be nice to see. Let me ask you a little bit about these indictments. So there were a number of criticisms, even from President Biden, of the announcement of a prosecution by ICC prosecutor Karim Khan. And one of the reactions was the equivalence that Khan posited between Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, and Benjamin Netanyahu, the democratically elected prime minister of the state of Israel. There were a number of other allegations as well, allegations of starvation, allegations of causing great suffering, willful killing, contrary to Article 8.2, blah, 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 blah. Anybody who wants to look it up can. But what is giving Khan the ability to charge Netanyahu, given that Israel is not a member state? Explain that to our listeners.
Well, he has no such authority, Danny, and the allegations are revolting. I would point out that President Biden, when he saddled up his high horse against it and denounced the moral equivalency of indicting both Sinwar and Netanyahu, did not actually refute the underlying revolting charges. The claim, for instance, Israel is trying to starve children in Gaza, or that Israel has intentionally targeted civilians in Gaza. Israel is fighting the most careful war, certainly urban war, probably in the history of mankind, and going out of its way to avoid civilian casualties. The civilian suffering and the civilian casualties in Gaza are solely the responsibility of Hamas for using civilians as human shields and political tools in their strategy to try to beat Israel politically, knowing they can't beat them militarily. Karim Khan, this rogue prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, is making false allegations against Israel in addition to the moral equivalency, when again, he has no jurisdiction. Israel has not ratified the Rome Statute that created the court. The United States has not done so. Yet the court also targeted our service members just a few years ago for their supposed crimes in Afghanistan. This is exactly the kind of thing that Jesse Helms predicted would happen a few decades ago with this court. It's the tendency and trajectory you see of all such globalist organizations that purport to put themselves above democratically accounted legislatures and heads of state. And the court has almost no internal checks and balances or due process protections either. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised that it tries to extend its mandate far beyond the terms of its own founding statute.
So it's particularly important to me to hear someone like you talk about the Israeli military operation and the deaths of civilians, because you actually have seen this kind of combat firsthand. You did a tour in Iraq. You were serving with the U.S. military. You saw us in action around the time of the surge. Put your old hat on, put your old army hat on, and talk a little bit about this kind of action and why, at least from my perspective, having done some research on this, this is a particularly egregious accusation.
Well, first off, Danny, I appreciate your kind words, but I don't want to compare what I experienced in Baghdad, for instance, to what Israeli troops are experiencing in Gaza. We were facing an insurgency that was deadly and that killed Americans, but they did not have much in the way of safe haven. They did not have the powers of a de facto state. They did not have years to prepare. That's exactly what Israel has faced in Gaza. Hamas has been the de facto governing authority in a quasi-statelet for 17 years with billions of dollars of foreign aid pouring in that ends up not going to create hospitals or schools or housing developments, but develop miles and hundreds of miles of tunnels underground through which Hamas can operate, both hide from Israeli warplanes and also be used to ambush Israeli troops. So what Israel is facing is much more challenging than what I personally faced in Baghdad. Nevertheless, Israel is going far above and beyond the requirements of the laws of war. And it's not just me saying that. Take an expert like John Spencer at our own military academy at West Point at the Urban Warfare Institute. He's compared it, historically to urban battles that we have fought in places like Iraq or the Philippines or that other nations have fought, and said that Israel's actions, for instance, to drop leaflets or to send text messages or to drop inert bombs to kind of give a physical warning that more is coming, is far above and beyond what is required of any military, and it puts their own troops at greater risk. But this is something that Israel has long done, that Israel's elected leaders, in no small part because of the decent, humane Israeli people, view that they don't want to kill civilians if they can at all avoid it. And they're willing to take on more risk to avoid civilian deaths that are caused by terrorists like Hamas or Hezbollah to its north. And that just can't be questioned. And the reason that Joe Biden seems to be questioning it, I think, is potentially for electoral considerations. He's worried about losing the small but very vocal pro-Hamas minority in his own party, or maybe even worse, it could be that those around him who have long opposed Israel and tried to find ways to undermine Israel want to use those electoral concerns as a pretext to do what their old boss, Barack Obama, always said he wanted to do, which is create daylight between Israel and the United States.
Put aside for a second the outrage about what is being done by this court, this rogue prosecutor to a U.S. ally who, as you point out, is gone out of the way to try and save civilian lives in the context of urban warfare. And look at what kind of impact this precedent would have on U.S. conduct of war in the future. I mean, if this is considered to be a criminal act prosecutable by a rogue prosecutor, is there any way the United States could carry out combat operations anywhere in the world after this without putting itself in the crosshairs of this court?
I don't see how, Mark. Remember that in 2019, when the International Criminal Court reopened investigations, I should say, from the Obama era about supposed war crimes American soldiers committed in Afghanistan, Donald Trump lowered the boom on them. He revoked the prosecutor's U.S. visa. He sanctioned other ICC leaders, and he labeled the court a threat to the United States. This is all pursuant to an act of Congress, the American Service Members Protection Act, which is, as you know, probably is sometimes humorously nicknamed the Hague Invasion Act, which authorized the president to take all necessary means to protect American troops from this kind of thing. But if we allow this to happen, of course, it's a test case not just for Israeli troops and Israeli leaders up to and including the prime minister, but for American troops and our leaders. And if you see what the domestic left has done to Donald Trump with these show trials in places like New York City over the last 4 years, that's a preview of what the international left will do, I'm quite confident, to Donald Trump in his second term and probably his Secretary of Defense and maybe some of his senior flag officers down to frontline troops. It all gets back, I should say, too, to the hostility of international bureaucrats like Karim Khan to Israel and America. They all envision that we're going to one day move from this outdated, antiquated, chauvinistic system of national government serving their own nation's interests to some transnational globalist government of lawyers and diplomats and professors and journalists. America and Israel refute that because we are the two democracies that use our military every single day to protect our people and to protect the free world. Israel obviously is doing that right now in Gaza. It's had to do it routinely over its life, and we've been doing that now for almost 80 years since the end of World War II to protect not only ourselves but our allies around the world. So we are a walking refutation every day in the way we use our military power to protect ourselves and protect our allies to the globalist ambitions of bureaucrats at places like the International Criminal Court.
So I want to talk about what we should do about this. The newspapers were reporting that there is a growing consensus between parts of Congress and even the Biden administration that potentially some kind of sanctions could be levied against Karim Khan, the International Criminal Court, etc. Here's my biggest concern, and Tom, you know all too well, this is a major topic of conversation in my house. Before you hopped on, I told Mark that I asked Stephen why he got up so early this morning, and he said, I was thinking about the International Criminal Court. And I was like, dude, really? But yes. So, when we imposed sanctions during the Trump administration, it was a lot like water off a duck's back for them. In fact, it was a little bit like when you were sanctioned by the communist Chinese government, which is, look at me, I'm doing the right thing. The bad guys hate me. That's how they use our censure. And so I'm wondering whether the road towards sanctioning them is the most effective means of deterring them from moving forward. What do you think?
Well, first off, Danny, I have to say that you're wrong. When I was sanctioned by China, I was crestfallen that I wouldn't be able to take a second honeymoon with my wife to Wuhan to sample the bat soup in retirement. But I should add, the only reason Congress is even talking about sanctions, that I've introduced legislation with some colleagues from the House, is that the Biden administration revoked all those actions that Donald Trump took pursuant to extant law, just like Barack Obama before Joe Biden. When he came into office, he reversed a lot of George Bush's actions and cooperated with the ICC, even though they were beginning to prosecute or to investigate the American troops' actions in Afghanistan. So I do think that it's called for. There are other actions we could also take. As I mentioned earlier, Karim Khan might find himself in an American prosecutor's crosshairs come next year when there's a new attorney general that actually puts American interests first. And if he thinks that it's all fun and games to slap an arrest warrant on Benjamin Netanyahu so he can't travel internationally, maybe he should get a taste of his own medicine. There's also the potential to work with our allies, maybe cajole them, maybe put a little pressure on them against any kind of cooperation with the ICC in a way that would, for instance, limit Benjamin Netanyahu's travel or provide material assistance to the court. I don't think there's one single way that we can express our strong resolution that this court has acted grievously out of its jurisdiction and can't be allowed to continue this in the future.
What do you think about the idea that's being proposed by certain House members to criminalize efforts by the ICC to go after U.S. officials and to afford foreign officials the same rights they have under ASPA, under the American Service Members Protection Act, to actually ask us to similarly criminalize these actions? Do you think is that a good idea?
I would want to explore it a little more carefully, Danny, before expressing a final opinion on it, something I would be open to. Again, I don't think we can react harshly enough to this illegitimate court.
Amen.
And there is a reason, as I mentioned earlier, that the American Service Members Protection Act is jokingly referred to as the Hague Invasion Act. That expressed just how strongly the Congress in the Bush era felt about this illegitimate court trying to extend its jurisdiction over Americans or over friends like the Israelis.
Let's talk a little bit about how this court actually claims jurisdiction over Israel, because obviously Israel, like the United States, is not a party to the Rome Statute. But in 2015, the state of Palestine became a party to the Rome Statute. And so I think the court is claiming that because these actions are taking place in the state of Palestine, that Israel is committing these supposed war crimes, which is a party to the treaty, that therefore they have jurisdiction. First of all, is there a state of Palestine? Is that a thing? And does it have a right to join an international treaty like the Rome Statute and therefore give the court jurisdiction over them?
Mark, that's the excellent foundational point, and it shows again why the International Criminal Court should be known as the International Kangaroo Court. There is no such thing as a state of Palestine. And an international organization, one that is part of a broader constellation of these globalist organizations that unfortunately receive millions of U.S. tax dollars, has no business admitting the so-called state of Palestine as a member or as a party. It's one thing if some misguided country wants to engage in diplomatic relations with the so-called state of Palestine, but for a multilateral international organization to do so is the height of folly, and it does not give any jurisdiction over Israel to say that the so-called state of Palestine, which does not exist today and has never existed, somehow is a party to this treaty, and therefore the court has jurisdiction.
I want to ask you a little bit about this UN problem, this Palestine problem, because the ICC was following in the courageously forged footsteps of UNESCO, which also admitted a state of Palestine. Now, we're not a party to the ICC. We don't give them any money, or nothing more than a little bit of spare change, I think, from various parts of the U.S. government. But of course, U.S. law precludes giving money to any United Nations organization, the UN or a specialized agency that admits a state of Palestine. A couple weeks ago, the United Nations General Assembly went all the way up to the line, basically affording the quote-unquote state of Palestine most of the privileges of membership, apart from voting and a few others. What should we be doing about this? We are providing tens of billions of dollars to these international organizations. It was really, really hard to get a cutoff for 1 year of money for UNRWA. Tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about this, because it really is turning out to be we and the Jews against the United Nations and international organizations.
Well, first off, UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, is a sordid rat's nest of anti-Semitism, reflecting the broader anti-Semitism within the United Nations constellation of organizations. There is a United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and somehow that office is suitable for every other legitimate, genuine refugee of war around the world, yet the so-called refugees in Gaza or Judea and Samaria or elsewhere from the Holy Land need their own specialized agency. Only thing in the world. And of course, in any case where you have one single standard that you target Israel with that you don't apply anywhere else, it's of course an anti-Semitic policy. America needs to show that we mean what we say in these laws and that we're not going to provide funding to United Nations agencies or organizations if they take the step of recognizing a so-called state of Palestine. Now, I don't expect Joe Biden to do that. I don't expect Democratic administrations to do that. I mean, they've been trying to do it all along. Joe Biden's first instinct after the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust was to roll out the old two-state solution once again, which has failed time and time again. It failed in part because the leaders in Gaza or of the Arab populations in Judea and Samaria, in addition to many, if not most of their people, don't want two states. They want one state, an Arab state, from the river to the sea, as they often chant, cleansed of all Jews. So we shouldn't tolerate the United Nations opposing American law, and we certainly shouldn't be pushing Israel into a suicidal set of actions that will lead to what are they saying now, an irreversible commitment to a Palestinian state.
I want to go back to the question of prosecuting the prosecutor and basically playing fire with fire. You were saying that it's possible, regardless of whether Congress acts, that he could find himself indicted in the United States. How would that work if Congress doesn't pass a specific crime of cooperating with the ICC?
We're exploring that right now, Mark. There are a few statutes that look like they might merit more investigation. One is the material support for terrorism statute. As both of you know, that's a fairly broad and sweeping law against providing any support to Hamas, which I remind you is a terrorist organization, not a charity. And in some of the statements that Karim Khan has made or in the written documents behind this latest action, it suggests that he might indeed, or his organization might indeed, have provided some kind of material aid or assistance to Hamas to get the information it needed or take these actions. I think that warrants further investigation. I doubt that Merrick Garland's Department of Justice is going to do it, but I suspect a new Department of Justice might do it come January.
And another option, it seems to me, I was interested to see that while some governments, notably France, supported the ICC action, that others have condemned it. Just looking up our research shows that the budget comes from Japan, Germany, France, the UK, Italy, and South Korea. Those are countries where we have a substantial amount of influence. It seems to me that that's another opportunity for us to start leaning on their budget to ensure, we've got troops in Italy, we've got troops in South Korea, we've got troops in Germany, we've got troops in Japan. They are with one hand taking our protection and with the other feeding our enemy. That seems to be a little incongruous.
Yeah, Danny, I mean, those are all good allies and partners.
Yep.
Some better, some worse. However, and we have lots and lots of interests in all those countries. Military, financial, economic, political. We balance all those, but it seems to me, as you say, one very high interest is that those countries not fund a kangaroo court that is targeting another American ally and also has a history of trying to target American soldiers as well. And again, I wouldn't expect Joe Biden or his administration to try to persuade them otherwise, but I suspect Donald Trump's administration might put that pretty high up on the list of things that their State Department is talking to our friends about.
Exit question from me, Tom. When Senator Helms was leading the charge against the ICC that you've now taken the mantle up, a lot of Democrats agreed with him and supported the American Service Members Protection Act. It passed with a pretty strong bipartisan majorities in both houses. Do you see the potential for bipartisanship here? Are there Democrats who are, putting aside the squad and the Ilhan Omars of the world who are the spokesman for Hamas in Congress? Do you see reasonable Democrats coming around a solution and potentially making it a criminal offense to go after the Americans, service members or our allies by the court?
Well, Mark, reasonable Democrats is an increasingly small universe in the Congress, but there still are a few on this specific issue. And yes, we've been in conversations in both the House and the Senate with some Democrats who understand that this is not only an outrage to Israel in the time of its fighting war of survival, but also a threat to our own service members, and ultimately a threat to elected representatives in Congress and future presidents and cabinet members too. So I do expect that we would have bipartisan support for the right kind of legislation. This is in contrast, for instance, to what happened in the House a little while ago when they voted on a bill to reverse Joe Biden's de facto arms embargo on Israel. That, I think, only ended up getting about 10 or 15 Democratic votes. The administration worked overtime, twisted arms to keep that low, but from a Democrat standpoint, they were being asked to repudiate the policy of the president of their party. Here, they're being asked to repudiate the actions of a rogue foreign bureaucrat, which the president of their own party has already denounced himself. That strikes me as an easier vote for a lot of Democrats, and also for those Democrats who are genuinely concerned about the future targeting of American troops or America's elected leaders. So I do expect we'd get bipartisan support for such legislation.
Quick exit question from me. When the International Criminal Court decided it should go after the United States and our actions in Afghanistan, we made clear to them in no uncertain terms what the consequences of that choice would be. And they backed down, I don't want to say fast, but pretty decisively, putting the investigation on the back burner. Do you think that we and our other allies, Democrats, Republicans together, will be able to get Khan to back down on this Israel indictment?
I suspect they probably won't, Danny, because they feel that Joe Biden is going to ride to their rescue. It was another story whenever Donald Trump was in the saddle. Now, it's possible because there are judges, I put in air quotes, at this international kangaroo court that have to act on Khan's application. Now, typically, they usually just go along with whatever the prosecutor proposes, but there is time for them to provide perhaps a sober second thought to Khan's highly ill-advised actions. But also, that's one reason why I sent that letter with Senator McConnell and several other Republicans last month, warning them about the consequences and why now we're taking steps to impose those consequences so they think twice, regardless who the president is.
Yeah, good advice. Good advice that they didn't take. It's always so great to talk to you, Senator Cotton. Tom, thank you so much for being with us. We know how busy you are, and so the fact that you took the time is just, we're really grateful.
And as two former Helm staffers, we are grateful to you for taking up the mantle of leadership on this issue that we wake up in the morning thinking about, and apparently so do you.
Thank y'all both.
Take
Take care.
care.
Okay, Danny, so how does the ICC claim to have jurisdiction over Israel when Israel is not a party to the ICC? Well, part of the Rome Statute says that a country that's not a party to the ICC could come under its jurisdiction if it commits its alleged war crimes on the territory of a state party to the ICC. And apparently, the state of Palestine in 2015 became a state party to the ICC, even though it's not a state. Explain it to us.
Let me contextualize this for people. The peace process, which has been a staple of our lives, certainly since Camp David in 1979, but even before then, and endlessly since, is dedicated to the idea of an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians to create a separate Palestinian state so that Israel can live within defined borders, within peace and security. We all know what that looks like. Okay, but the peace process has for many years gone nowhere, in part because it was clear that those who were theoretically going to take over a Palestinian state, i.e. the Palestinian Authority that was created in 1993 on the back of the Oslo Accords, was never going to go anywhere. So the Palestinians decided, this peace process crap is for losers. What we should engage in is a war on territory where we have sympathizers, the international community. And this is when the Palestinians embraced lawfare, right? Warfare by other means through law. And so we see that the United Nations General Assembly elevates the status of Palestine. I wrote about this on our Substack if anyone's interested. We see that the International Criminal Court admits the non-existent state of Palestine. Now, let me just, pose a couple of practical questions to our listeners. Who's the leadership of the state of Palestine? Is it Mahmoud Abbas, the 18, 19, how many years has he been president for life of the Palestinian Authority?
19 years into his 4-year term, right?
19 years into his 4-year term. Is it Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, right? Is
Elected leader of Gaza.
Right? Is it him? Because I don't know. On top of that, just by the way, if anybody can reach back into the Wayback Machine, the United Nations Treaty says that it is devoted to peace and security. And by the way, for a country to be a member, it has to be devoted to, peace and security. How anybody thinks that this is not a farce, a joke, a mockery of what international law and international agreements are about is a mystery to me.
Well, this is the same institution that puts Iran and China and as the head and Cuba as the head of the Human Rights Council.
Exactly.
So consistency with the founding principles is not a main feature. Inconsistency with these principles is not a bug; it's a feature of the United Nations. So there is no state of Palestine after October 7th. It calls into question whether there ever should be a state of Palestine. But certainly, we shouldn't be talking about giving the supposed state of Palestine sovereign rights in the wake of October 7th, which would only reward the act of terrorism by giving them those kinds of rights. But the idea that some supranational body of unelected judges and prosecutors can decide who is a state and who is not is farcical. But it's not any more farcical than that same body deciding that it can supersede the legal systems of democracies who are not parties to the Rome Statute that created the court, don't accept its jurisdiction, but impose it anyway. And this is the problem with, I know you don't like the term, but this is the problem with globalism, which
I don't like it.
I know. I prefer to use the term supranationalism, but it's the same thing. Globalism used to mean, and I wrote about this back in the 2000s when I was with Helms, is the idea that there are global institutions that are supranational in power and assert power over sovereign nations. And we don't accept that in the United States. We don't accept that the United Nations Security Council has greater power over the U.S. than the United States Congress, or that a unelected, unaccountable prosecutor has the right to threaten legislators from carrying out their duties as members of Congress, much less indict an American citizen when the United States has chosen not to ratify the Rome Statute that creates this institution. But
we're not even a signatory to it. Bill Clinton signed it. Congress made clear it wouldn't ratify it, and then George Bush unsigned it.
Exactly. So we're not a signatory. We haven't ratified it, and yet they presume to have power over over American citizens. This is why your husband wrote the American Service Members Protection Act, aka drafted. He was the primary author of the legislative language, which is also known as the Hague Invasion Act, which authorizes the United States to use all necessary force. It's actually an AUMF, authorizing us to liberate any Americans taken hostage by this rogue institution. And that's still in effect, by the way. I would let Mr. Khan know. So if you try and mess with us, the United States military has an authorization of military force against you.
Mark, I mean, all of this raises the question again that I wrote a piece for the Dispatch at the beginning of this year. I never used to like people who were sort of, black helicopter types. Ooh, the UN is coming to take over our country, blah, blah, blah. You know what? We give them so much money, and every single part of the UN system, whether it's the ICC or the World Health Organization or the General Assembly of the UN, is an enemy to the United States and the antithesis of the values we hold dear. I'm starting to believe that we should just forget about underwriting them, send them to Lagos, let them hang out in Africa with their friends, and not with us.
As our friend, the late Chuck Lichtenstein, said, if the UN ever wants to leave New York, I'll be standing on the deck waving goodbye as they set off into the sunset. That's how I feel about the UN. That's how I feel about the International Criminal Court.
Amen. Folks, thanks for joining us. Let us know if you have any ideas. Sign up for our Substack, and thanks for being with us.
Take care. See you next week.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.